For 6 months, I kept the same morning routine. Not coffee, not breakfast, just a blood sugar test. Every morning before sunrise, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The house was silent. I'd prick my finger, wait for the meter to beep, stare at the number for a few seconds, and then, well, I'd quietly throw the test strip away. No one knew, especially not my daughter. At 82 years old, I've learned that some worries feel heavier when you share them. And after losing my wife, I already felt like, huff. My family had been through enough. So I kept this one to myself, you know. After my wife passed away, the rhythm of the house changed in ways I never expected. For decades, mornings had always started with another person in the room. The sound of a kettle, a conversation about nothing important. The simple comfort of knowing someone else was awake. Then one day, all of that was gone. The house wasn't just quiet. It felt different. Some mornings, I'd sit at the kitchen table long after breakfast and realize I hadn't spoken a single word out loud. That's probably one reason. I kept my health concerns to myself. When you're alone enough, you get used to carrying things quietly. You tell yourself you'll deal with it tomorrow, then tomorrow becomes next week. And before you know it, months have passed. The truth is, my blood sugar numbers had started creeping in the wrong direction. And that really scared me. Not because I thought my life was ending. I've lived a long life, a good one. What frightened me was something else. The possibility of losing my independence, losing my eyesight, having a stroke, needing help with things I had always done myself, or becoming so dependent that my daughter would have to put her own life on hold just to take care of me. That thought stayed with me, especially at night. So I decided to take control, or at least I thought I was. Out went the cookies, out went the desserts. Even fruit started making me nervous. I simplified everything. 3 meals a day, nothing fancy, nothing sweet, no exceptions. And every morning I ate what I honestly believed was one of the healthiest breakfasts possible, a bowl of plain white congee. Warm, simple, comforting. It was the kind of food I had trusted my entire life. The kind of food many people consider gentle and healthy. So I never questioned it, but after a while, I started noticing something strange. Almost every morning, not long after finishing breakfast, I would feel exhausted. Not sleepy, exhausted, like someone had quietly pulled the plug on my energy. Sometimes I'd sit down on the couch for a moment and wake up much later than I intended. Other times, I'd feel shaky, hungry, a little lightheaded. So I'd test my blood sugar again, and the numbers would often be higher than I expected. I remember staring at the screen and wondering what I was doing wrong. Some mornings, I would look at the number, write it down, and compare it to the previous week, then the previous month. I was always searching for a pattern. Maybe I ate too much. Maybe I didn't walk enough. Maybe it was simply my age. I kept replaying the same possibilities in my head. What frustrated me most was that nothing about my routine felt unhealthy. If someone had looked at my breakfast, they probably would have called it sensible. If someone had opened my refrigerator, they would have seen very little sugar and almost no desserts. Yet the numbers kept giving me the same uneasy feeling, like I was missing a piece of the puzzle that was sitting right in front of me. And because I couldn't find that missing piece, every reading started carrying a little more emotional weight than the one before, because from my perspective, I was doing everything right. I had already given up the foods I enjoyed. I was trying my best, and yet things didn't seem to be improving. Month after month, I became more frustrated, then more worried, and eventually, if I'm being honest, a little discouraged. I started asking myself difficult questions. Was I heading toward the very outcome I was trying so hard to avoid? Would all these sacrifices even make a difference? I didn't have answers, so I kept testing, kept recording numbers, kept carrying that worry by myself. Then one weekend, everything changed. My daughter came by with my granddaughter. She has a spare key. I didn't hear them come in. I was sitting at the kitchen table, doing what had become my secret morning ritual. Meter, lancet, notebook, numbers. When I looked up, she was standing there. And in that moment, I knew there was no hiding it anymore. She saw the test strips. She saw the notebook. She saw the marks on my fingertips from months of testing. For a second, neither of us said much. Then she walked over, sat down beside me, and gently took my hand. "Dad," she said softly, "how long has this been going on?" I told her the truth, about 6 months. She didn't get angry. She didn't lecture me. Instead, she asked a simple question. "What have you been eating every morning?" I pointed toward the stove. There was half a pot of white congee sitting there, the same breakfast I had eaten almost every day. "I haven't touched sweets," I told her. "I just ate congee." She looked at it for a moment, then back at me, and she said something I wasn't expecting. "Dad, that may be part of the problem." At first, I thought she was joking. Congee? Really? That food had been around my entire life. But she explained something I had never seriously considered. When white rice is cooked into very soft congee, the starch becomes much easier for the body to digest. For some people, especially those already managing blood sugar challenges that can lead to a faster rise in blood glucose after eating. I sat there trying to process what she was saying. The breakfast I trusted most, the breakfast I thought was helping, might not have been helping me at all. That afternoon, we talked for a long time, not about miracle foods, not about quick fixes, just about making better choices. And that's when she introduced me to a different way of preparing porridge. The funny thing is, I have never been a fan of whole grains. Too chewy, too rough, too difficult on old teeth. Most of my friends felt the same way. That's one reason many of us preferred white congee in the first place. But my daughter showed me something called sprouting, and that was new to me. Instead of using mostly white rice, she prepared a mixture. A small amount of white rice, then quinoa, brown rice, red rice, millet, red lentils, mung beans, adzuki beans, black beans, black-eyed peas, a handful of raw peanuts, a few raw cashews. But the real difference wasn't just the ingredients, it was the preparation. Every evening, we rinsed everything thoroughly, then soaked it overnight, covered it, left it alone. And the next morning, tiny sprouts would begin to appear. Nothing dramatic, just little signs of life. My daughter explained that during the early stages of sprouting, grains and legumes begin using some of their stored energy for growth. She also told me researchers have studied sprouted foods for potential benefits related to digestion and certain naturally occurring compounds, including GABA. What mattered most to me, though, was something much simpler. It felt easier on my stomach. For years, I assumed whole grains simply weren't for me. Maybe they weren't the problem. Maybe I just wasn't preparing them properly. So we cooked everything into a warm porridge, soft, comforting, easy to eat. I used to pair my congee with salty pickles. These days, I keep things simple. A few drops of soy protein seasoning, a tiny pinch of sea salt. That's it. And honestly, I enjoy it. The grains become creamy, the beans add body, the peanuts and cashews bring a gentle nuttiness. It tastes like real food, not a punishment, not a health project, just breakfast. What surprised me most wasn't the taste. It was how different the rest of the morning felt. For months, breakfast had almost become something I worried about. I'd finish eating and immediately start paying attention to how I felt. Was I getting tired? Was I getting hungry again? Should I check my blood sugar one more time? The meal itself had become tied to anxiety. But over time, that feeling started fading. Breakfast became breakfast again. Something I could enjoy instead of analyze. I stopped treating every morning like a test. I might fail. And although I still paid attention to my health, I no longer felt like I was spending every waking hour thinking about it. That change was difficult to measure on a chart, but it mattered to me, maybe more than I realized at the time. Then something interesting happened, not overnight, not in a week, but gradually. The dramatic ups and downs I used to feel became less common. My energy felt steadier. I wasn't constantly thinking about my next blood sugar reading. One bowl kept me satisfied for hours. And little by little, my mornings felt normal again. So I stayed with it. One day at a time, one breakfast at a time. Months passed, then almost a full year. A few days ago, I went in for a follow-up appointment. My doctor reviewed my records, turned a few pages, looked at my recent numbers, then he tapped the chart with his pen. "Whatever you've been doing lately," he said, "keep doing it." I smiled all the way home, and when I stepped outside the clinic, I found myself looking down at my feet, still carrying me, still taking me where I wanted to go. I don't think I'll ever forget that moment. When I got home, I put my glucose meter, test strips, and lancets into a storage box, not because diabetes disappeared, and not because I stopped paying attention, but because fear was no longer in charge. That's a very different thing. I still take care of myself. I still pay attention, but I don't wake up every morning feeling defeated. And I know my daughter worries a little less now, too. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that we shouldn't assume a food is right for us simply because we've eaten it our entire lives. Our bodies change. Our needs change. Sometimes a habit deserves a second look, especially as we get older. My wife is gone now. My children have their own families and responsibilities. The one thing that stays with me every hour of every day is this aging body. Taking care of it isn't selfish. In many ways, it's one of the kindest things we can do for the people who love us. So tonight, maybe take a closer look at your own breakfast. Maybe rethink one habit you've never questioned. Sometimes small changes are easier than we imagine, and sometimes they matter more than we expect. If you've ever struggled with blood sugar, or if you've found a breakfast that works well for you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. I read more of them than you might think. And before I go, a few people have asked me something interesting. If changing breakfast helps so much, why did it still take time for my numbers to stabilize? The answer is simple, because breakfast wasn't the only mistake I was making. There was something I drank every single day, something I thought was completely harmless. And looking back, it may have been causing even bigger problems than the congee. I'll tell you that story next time. Thank you for listening.